It can only be attributable to human error.
You're entering Paranormal.
He meddled in things that should be built. He meddled in things. He meddled in things.
Where will we go next? This phantom from another time.
No one, Mr. Mulder.
That's it, man. Game over, man. Game over.
That is one big pile of shit.
Hello, I'm Alex Daikaiju.
I'm Jasmine with
I'm Eli Watson.
And we are
Cryptid.
Campfire.
And today we are joined by a special guest on this episode. Why don't you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. I'm Carrick St. Laurent of Crash Course Cryptozoology. I've been on the podcast a few times, and it's always very enjoyable, so I'm glad to be on again today.
Yes, welcome back.
Yeah, woohoo, and we can see you now too, which is kind of
That's
exciting.
true. Everyone can see how much I look like a prepubescent Aquaman.
Magnificent.
How many times have you been on the show, Carrick?
Twice that I can recall off the top of my head, because we did the episode on the Ropin, which was, if I'm not mistaken, a Patreon episode.
Yes.
And we did Humorous Humanoids, which was all about humanoid primate all in between sightings in New Hampshire.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Oh yeah.
Did I ever formally interview you or no? You've just been guest starring.
I think just guest starring.
Oh wait, at least 3, because we did that live show around the campfire. It wasn't live, but
so technically 4 actually, because that one was also 2 episodes, because that was
oh yeah.
Champ and Squashy Weirdness. Right.
Oh my
And
goodness.
I have been present for none of those.
Yeah.
I know.
But we brought you on today because from what Eli says, you're a little bit of an expert on what we're going to be talking about today on this stop in our world tour.
It would be wonderful if that is what I am. I'm not sure if I am, but I think I've consumed as much media on this subject that is out there. So I suppose as close as you can get to it, yes.
Fantastic.
And what is the subject?
Well, the subject is something that is referred to as the Burrunger, which is kind of, what would I say about the Burrunger in like a sort of encapsulating statement? Well, it's very interesting and it's very confusing because there is kind of this weird rabbit hole that you jump into with the Burrunger specifically.
Mhm.
And in a lot of different places, and not a lot of them have very clear conclusions, is what I would say. What the Burrunger is supposed to be, essentially, is it refers to sightings in Australia of large tyrannosaur-like reptiles, theropod dinosaurs, essentially.
Ooh. Yeah.
Which, obviously is interesting because we don't, even though they're very popular, there's not a whole lot of these surviving dinosaur stories out there. They're kind of in the minority, even though they're very popular. So, that makes the Burrunger case really interesting. I was just telling Eli the other day, I think, too, with the Burrunger, there's something really, I don't know, there's something about the case of the Burrunger specifically that I feel attached to, because over the course of the 4 years that I've been kind of getting more and more into cryptozoology actively, I have never once teetered off interest in the Burrunger. There's something kind of whimsically encapsulating about it, I think.
I mean, you can't go wrong with a dinosaur.
How could you even? Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, so continuing on this sort of world tour narrative that we're on, we've now made our way to Australia, specifically the central Australian outback, where most sightings / encounters of this creature have occurred. Carrick, you kind of gave a brief description of like what it looks like physically. I think I heard at some point that it's mostly reported as being like gray or dull in color, average height being around 25 to 30 feet tall. And there actually have been prints that have like 3 toes that have been found, earning it the nickname Old 3 Toes, which I think is pretty funny.
Yeah, it reminds you of, I think it's supposed to be a Bigfoot name up here in New England, but Old Slippery Skin. Have you heard of that, Eli? Have any of you heard of that?
No.
Alexander mentioned it to me. Alexander Pedikov did. I guess that's like one of the old logging names for Bigfoot up in like the Maine area is Old Slippery Skin,
Why?
which is I
Does
don't know.
anyone know why?
I mean, I think a bigger question is why did that fall out of favor? Let me take this opportunity to thank y'all for watching Cryptid Campfire and ask that if you enjoy our shows, please subscribe to our channel right now. Like this video and click on the bell so you can be notified each time a new video goes up. And now, back to the show.
Why did that fall out of favor?
We should have, Old Slippery Skin hunting parties and Old Slippery Skin search foundations.
Finding Old Slippery Skin, the TV show.
Yeah, I'm ready for
Oh my goodness. I don't like this.
it.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but the first kind of evidence or proof, we could say, of a Burringer-like creature came from ancient Aboriginal artwork. Is that correct? On cave paintings?
It is potentially correct. I just kind of finished looking into the cave painting side of things last night. And so I have this book here, which Eli actually so graciously got for me, and I plan to return the favor. It is a book by Rex and Heather Gilroy, who are two Australian cryptozoologists, and they also get into UFOs, the Yowie, which is Australia's Bigfoot psychic phenomenon. So they're kind of Fortean researchers more so. And he's written this book called Burringer, The Search for Australia's Living Tyrannosaurus. It's a pretty lengthy book. Most of it is recounts of alleged encounters, but in it are allegedly some interesting carvings found on, outcroppings and inside caves and things like that. I'm trying to find a really good solid. Okay, yeah, here's an example. These particular two are not claimed in the book to be of Burringers, but they're exemplary of other pictures which he's posted online rather than in his book here that are supposed to be of Burringer art, but there's something kind of off about them. So I'm not sure how well we can see this here. This kind of chalky outline that we're seeing here is supposed to be the petroglyph that he's talking about in this book. And it's harder to see here because the rock is modeled, but there are definitely some shapes there. Now, the problem with this that I run into, this is not what Aborigine petroglyphs look like. If you look up Aborigine petroglyphs, they are exceedingly detailed. And they're not made out of this carved or chalky substance. They're often made out of things that actually have color to them. Not a wide range of color, but more color. And they really are, Aboriginal mythology and art, by extension, is it's an abstract phenomenon. The Aborigines probably have one of the kind of, for lack of a better term, trippiest mythologies in the world. Their origin story for their culture is called the Dreaming because it's so abstract. And the depictions that they have of this are really whimsical and detailed and look absolutely nothing like the art style being presented here. So most of the alleged Burringer petroglyphs I'm very skeptical of. There is one that I find interesting that is definitely actual Aborigine cave art. This can actually be seen at the end of the Destination Truth episode on the Burringer. And there is a genuine Aborigine cave painting, that depicts this bipedal animal standing on two legs. It has no arms. Or if it does, they're tucked, maybe. Maybe it's almost like wings or something. But there are no visible arms, just the legs. Long legs, body that kind of leans forward. And then there's this big head at the front, and the head literally almost looks like a buffed up Venus flytrap. It's this big head with these big jaws and these sharp teeth, and this almost kind of small frill at the back of the head. And the two running theories for what that is potentially an extinct species of bipedal bird that used to live in Australia, which humans may have been around to see. And then of course you have, that's a bipedal reptilian with a big jaw. That's a theropod, the theropod dinosaur. So aside from that one, which again you can find at the end of the Destination Truth episode, and I think images of it are also available online. I would say that we have very scant record definitively of the Burrunger in native art.
Aborigines, of course, being the native people of Australia. For anyone who might not have known that off the top of their head, that is what that terminology means.
Right, and they arrived on Australia between 65,000 and 45,000 years ago.
How do you know that? Did you ask one?
I did actually. I asked one who was 60,000 years old. In fact,
Oh my lord.
How'd they get there? Did they travel the ice bridge from back in the day?
well, they were in Russia, and they're really good jumpers, so they just kind of jumped to Australia. No, I don't actually. I'm not clear on that. If I had to take a guess, it could be that they came from the same area as Polynesians, who we would today call the Indonesians and the Hawaiians, Pacific Islanders.
Wasn't there a land bridge between Australia and like the rest of Asia?
I think there was. That would make sense because that's roughly the area that Australia was placed in when the continents were all still the supercontinent Pangaea. When it split apart, Australia, what I'm trying to say, I guess, is if you took Pangaea and then took all of the continents apart and put them where they are now, except for Australia, Australia would be directly linked over to like southeastern Asia. So definitely, probably there was some kind of connection at some point.
Yeah. R.I.P. Pangea.
R.I.P. Pangea,
Better
dude.
times.
Dude,
We were all together back then.
My supercontinent.
So I don't know what comes next chronologically. Have there been sightings of this Burrunger? Or you know what? Actually, let's do this. Let's go this way. Do the Aborigines say anything about the Burrunger? It appears to be a debated topic, or
Yes.
at least a murky topic of actual depictions of the Burrunger. But do they say anything about it?
The short answer is yes, and the long answer is yes, but there's some caveats. So, for starters, I want to make clear, which I guess we kind of discussed already with the cave paintings, that there's kind of a problem, I would say especially in Rex Gilroy's writing, with two things, which is reliable pieces of evidence for a narrative about the Burrunger in Aborigine mythology, but also with citing sources. There's a big problem with citing sources in the book. So I would say that Rex Gilroy's book, at best, implies that Aborigines have a placement of the Burrunger under a few different names in their mythologies. One he cites a lot, which I believe is the western areas of Aborigine territory, where they call a similar animal the Muramuri. I don't know if that's true. It's hard to find translations for any of these. I have not yet found, even in Rex Gilroy's writing, a translation for the word Burrunger. We know what Burrunger denotes, but we don't know where the word comes from, and we don't have a direct to other languages translation of what Burrunger actually means. Now,
I noticed that because usually when
Yes.
we're researching a certain cryptid, almost always there's this name which means this in this language, and there's some type of translation, but I found nothing for this one.
yeah, and that was troubling to me. The only explanation that I can think of for that wouldn't involve the Burrunger actually being a made-up term that wasn't used before the 1950s, roughly, which is possible, I think, would be that perhaps Burrunger isn't a word, but it's a name. So in the way that when we talk about Gilgamesh in the the Babylon mythology, we don't say what Gilgamesh means because Gilgamesh isn't a word, it's a name. Or like in the same mythology, Enkidu is not a word, it's a proper name. So it could be that the word Burrunger isn't a word, but it's a name for something. It's, oh, that is Burrunger, not, oh, that's a Burrunger. I don't know if that's true. And it's hard because I'm not familiar with Aborigine language either. So I don't know if I could even tell you if it sounds like an Aborigine word.
Gotcha.
That being said, there is evidence beyond Rex Gilroy's work that Aborigines are we'll say that at the very least they are familiar with the concept. Destination Truth is another example. I just rewatched it again today because I've been rewatching it over and over to kind of get an idea of what happens in the episode.
And I
For
believe
those of
that's
you-
season 2, episode 9. Is that correct?
Yes, you're right. Yeah. And I forget the names of the people, but they talk to two people. One of them who is, if I'm not mistaken, a half Aborigine tour guide, and his friend who's full Aborigine, and both of them talk about the Burringer. And one of them talks about having an encounter that was visual, in which he and his stepfather heard a loud commotion in the yard one night, went out, and he was a young kid at the time, and the stepfather shushed him and had him go back inside because they could both see this very large towering object, which they believed to be an animal, standing on the hill. And while telling the story, the guide actually got up on his chair, and maybe he was a very tall guy, I don't know, and stood up and said, even standing on my chair like this thing towered over me. So this thing was huge. There's another person who they talk to who is, I don't think they're named in the episode, but they're a participant in this Aborigine dance that a group of Aborigines put on to kind of, welcome them into visiting their area. And he talks about seeing a similar thing that he described as being orange in color, which is not consistent with what Gilroy's book says. But again, this is kind of, there's a lot of questions about this book, so I'm not sure how much I would actually go off of it for color, let's say.
And Destination Truth is Josh Gates.
Yes, and I was going to bring that up too, which is kind of, it just being a TV show as well, I would say it makes it also questionable because you have the possibility of editing right then and there. And I found myself concerned with that because I noticed that out of the 3 people they talked to who claim to have seen something, not one of them says the word Burringer, and not one of them says the word dinosaur. They describe a large animal. And I can't help but feel concerned that they were talking about something else. And it was edited into the context of a discussion about the Burringer. I could be wrong. It could just be that everyone knew what they were talking about, so they didn't need to say the word Burringer. But
maybe
leaving the room for error open there.
Maybe they couldn't get the licensing rights to say it.
Yeah, maybe Disney owns the word Burringer for the next Marvel movie. Who knows?
You never know.
Now,
Spider-Man.
Spider-Man No Way Home from the Burringer.
So we're not exactly following our typical layout for an episode, which is totally fine. We're having more of a, I think, conversation about the Burringer rather than just a relaying of information. And since you brought Rex Gilroy up already and have kind of been talking about the maybe not factual things that are in the book that you're referencing right now that you have with you, that came out in 2013, is that correct?
I believe it did. Let me check the publication on it really quick, but I think you're right. I know that Rex started writing in the 1950s, and he's rather old. Yeah, so 2011.
Can you hold up the spine? How thick is that book again?
Oh, this is a pretty thick book, actually.
Look at that! Look at that phone book.
This is, let me see. It's roughly 350 pages, so it's quite a lot.
I was looking at some conversations that took place on Reddit about the Burringer, and there's some people that speculate the Burringer is just a creation of Gilroy, saying that the word Burringer, its name, its description, it doesn't appear in any publications prior to Rex Gilroy. And he's like the sole source for the majority, if not all, of the cases. And I don't know how factual this is because I personally don't have the books, but supposedly the word Burringer first appears in literature in 1995 in another one of Gilroy's books, which is Mysterious Australia. So
I wonder if I had read 95 and not, I probably did read 1995 and for some reason thought it said 1959. I'm not sure why, but I've seen the post that you're talking about, actually. And it prompted me to go over to this oh, what is it called? It's this service that Google provides where you can look at search terms, but not search engine terms, like the use of terms popularity over time. And
Yes,
I
I know what
wanted
you're
to
talking.
see, and it's called Ngram, I think.
Mm,
And what it does is it gives you a graph and it gives you a timeline at the bottom. So let's say from 1800 to the present at the bottom. And the y-axis that it gives you is just the amount of times that this term has popped up in usage, basically. And it gives you a graph of, it spiked up in 1920 something and then lowered again until 1970 something or something along those lines. And I wanted to see what effect the word Gilroy had on the word dinosaur. And I noticed something interesting, which was that there's kind of a very loose, probably nothing relationship between the two words until you get to, let me look at the graph, roughly 1970. And they actually rise at an almost identical rate after that with each other, which I don't know exactly what that means because I've also looked at graphs, relating the words Australia and Gilroy to each other, as well as Australia and dinosaurs to each other, and they have no relation. It's just Gilroy and dinosaur. When I looked up Burringer, there was simply not enough usages to even give me data. So that could be significant too, but it also suggests that even if Burringer, people know more about the term Burringer now than they did 20 years ago, regardless of whether or not Burringer was used before then. So the fact that no data pops up for Burringer doesn't really suggest much because it's going into the present. So if we were going to try and find a graph that says, oh yeah, Burringer usage spikes out of nowhere in 1995, it wouldn't pop up as it is right now anyway. There's no way that we could even quantify the amount of Burringer uses we have right now. So whether it existed before then or not, I don't know, because apparently it's still too unpopular a term to even be represented in data in the present. So there's that.
so it's fake?
You're jumping ahead, Eli.
So you're saying the Behringer debuted the same year as the Chupacabra in 1995?
Dude, what I'm saying is that 1995 is when the Australian shadow government sent the Chupacabras into Puerto Rico, and now we have to... I didn't plan out this joke, never mind.
Keep going.
I've got nothing. I've got absolutely nothing.
Well, we've already discussed shadow governments in this tome. Japan, Ninja, they put out the fake posts, the fake pictures to siphon credibility.
Siphon credibility.
Yeah.
The precious commodity of credibility.
Well,
a lot of
Carrick,
work.
you were talking about maybe the mix-up of 1995 and 1959 or whatever it was.
Yeah, that's a mistake on my part, I think. Yeah.
However, I'm wondering if maybe in your mind you have floating around the string of cattle killings that happened in the 50s.
I think I probably do. Yeah, which I've not found any photographs of that. But what I will say, and I don't want to... Rex Gilroy's writing on this is not all bad, is what I should say. Because even though I think there's reason to suspect a lot of it, there are some individuals he names by full name when talking about their encounters. So, and some of those are those cattle farmers.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting because I don't know what really to make of that exactly. I wish that there were more sources on that. I suppose what I would have to do is look into the newspapers that run or that were running at the time in the locations that those cattle killings were happening at and try to see if there were any articles about anything like that happening.
Yeah.
And can I add something too about photographic evidence? You're dealing with the mid to late 1950s. Certainly there are home cameras by that point, but definitely not as readily available as today, especially like way out there in the outback when it's just farmers. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
right. No need for them. Yeah.
So,
And if it's something as simple as like, oh, let's get some photography and what, dead animals? We're moving
Yeah.
on. We got a new herd to
Why
get to.
newspapers would be the only source you could potentially find some at, because they're the only source in the area that would probably care enough to take photos of that.
Now, the general claim about these killings is that there were several scenarios where cows and sometimes several in one site were found bitten in half,
Right.
and large bones being broken by what was assumed to be massive jaws. Most of the cattle was left half devoured, which I also find interesting, because why would you just devour half of multiple cows instead of just eat one full cow? Whatever.
Rude.
All right, like what a waste of food. But there's also claims that it's not just like cattle that the Burringer feeds on, but also like camels and kangaroos. The camels specifically, I looked a little bit into. I actually watched your video on the Burringer, Carrick, where you were talking about the population of camels in Australia. I think you put that video out a couple years ago in 2018. So, I mean, yeah, camels. It was interesting because in that video you talk about how camels were not native to Australia and they were instead brought over for some sort of.
Yeah, Australia's got a weird history of bringing over the wrong kind of animal, because there's cane toads and there's camels, and they also lost a war to emus. It doesn't seem like the wildlife is restrained very much.
Right. But the thing is, when the camels were no longer needed, they were just set loose, which is very similar to what we talked about in our Red Ghost of Arizona episode, which happened here in the US, where camels were just set free and became wild and breeded and then just are suddenly everywhere.
well,
Go ahead.
the opposite. We can't find those camels anymore, but there's still sightings of them sometimes.
They must have been eaten by Burringers, North American Burringers.
Yeah.
No, they just went underground. They're living in the hollow earth.
Subterranean camp.
Yeah.
But I think the main reason for talking about the camels in that video, and then the main reason that I brought it up now, is it's kind of like what we would assume to be the food source for a Burringer, the Burringer, a Tyrannosaurus-like creature living in Australia. Like, what would it feed on? Like, that's one of the biggest arguments, is how could it survive? And people say camels, because
well, there's three answers to that question, roughly speaking, too. And one is the one that you just talked about, which is camels. Camels and livestock, which is kind of, I guess, interesting, because let's say you had a population of large theropods living out in the outback that were feeding on feral camels. They would only each individual
feral camels. Sorry,
that's
that's
they
funny
are
to me.
feral camels. Camels gone wild. You would only need, as a full-grown theropod of a Tyrannosaurus size, or I should say a Tyrannosaurus rex's size, because we have tons of Tyrannosaur variety, would only need to eat one camel per day. Now, that's kind of a bare minimum. So it's, it's probably going to want to eat more than that, but it could just subsist on that. And I guess one could argue, hypothetically, to play devil's advocate to non-Burringer points, well, maybe we have cattle being half-eaten because these aren't the things that they subsist on. This is a night snack for maybe younger ones or something. But of course, that gets into very far into hypothetical territory. Very, we would have already had to agree that Burringers exist at that point, which is not a thing that's agreed upon whatsoever.
Hold your tongue, sir.
Hold your tongue.
Well, let's take a vote.
Well, we're not even done discussing. We haven't talked about the prince. We haven't talked about the
That's
cats.
true.
We haven't talked about the birds.
I'm just saying that's 365 camels a year for just one Burringer.
But there are also roughly 1 million camels out there, and they're always breeding.
What about cows? I figured cows would be comparable in size to a camel.
Yes, but they're closer to civilization too.
Well, yeah, but we know the Burrungers are not scared of farmers.
And they're not filled with those sacks of water that tenderize the meat like the camel.
Tenderize the meat, boiled
Yeah.
camel. No, that's a good point, actually, talking about the whole, like, well, if there's so much cattle out there, why wouldn't a large predator just go for cattle?
Well,
And
okay, that's the thing though, because we already discussed, the reports of cattle being half eaten. Why would it do that? Because it's on the move. So it's like eating chicken nuggies when you're driving the car. It takes
It's
twigs,
drive and go.
takes a quick bite, eats half a cow as it's walking. It's like, I need another bite, kills another cow, and just keeps moving. By the time in the morning, it's gone. There's all this carnage left behind, and it's had a full belly. And then it
Looks like
went
it
to
had-
go hunt more camels or something, or
there's an interesting account that it doesn't talk about that directly, but it mentions that a little bit. And I think it might be good for just a bit of food for thought in this discussion point here directly. Back when I made my video on the Burringer, I had two people in the comments talk about second and third hand encounters being relayed. One person talked about, as far as I know, it was an Aborigine legend in an area he had visited in Australia about what was the terminology? An animal with the body of a kangaroo and the head and skin of a crocodile, which is a rudimentary description, roughly, of a theropod, a strange looking theropod. But if you had to liken a theropod to any animal in Australia, you would say, okay, yeah, it kind of looks like a kangaroo, right? Because it holds its body horizontal to the ground. It's got those long legs and that tail. The second one that I got was a secondhand sighting from someone who claimed to have had a friend who claimed to have seen a Burringer. And I thought this account was interesting too, because this person didn't proclaim their belief in the Burringer. They believed their friend believed they saw something. And the story involved their friend having an Aborigine wife. They had moved out of the suburbs onto a farm piece of property that they've been saving up for a very long time. And they did a lot of field work out there. And they had a lot of acres, apparently. So this kind of, you can go a good distance on the property and still be on the property. And at one point, apparently this person encountered what they called a T-Rex by a river that was on their property. And it scared them so bad that without explaining what happened, because how the hell do you begin to explain that, moved the family out of there. And a few years passed, and it really put tense strain on the marriage. So at one point, the wife tells him, "You have to tell me why we moved, or I'm leaving. I'm taking the kids." So he tells her, and according to the story, again, fully Aborigine wife just kind of thought it was almost funny and was like, "Oh, you could have told me that anytime. My people know about those things. We just don't talk about them because people think that we're crazy." And part of the description, which I think relates to what we were just talking about a bit, was apparently she said to him, more than anything, she was surprised that one had come so close because they don't like people. So I don't know if that has something to do with why there's not more reports of cattle attacks. Again, that's assuming these things even exist, let alone that they're responsible for these attacks, let alone that these attacks even happened.
Mm-hmm.
But I think it's an interesting detail to consider, especially with thinking about how strategic larger theropods like Tyrannosaurus probably was, just going off of the cranial capacity that they possessed. These were not, I'm going to run and kill and then eat predators. These were strategic things that planned out what they were going to do.
Mm-hmm. I think the real takeaway is it always helps to be open in your marriage and talk about things. Almost tore apart that family not talking about T-Rexes.
It's true.
Wait, first of all, I'm going to put the pin in the whole, divorce thing. You're telling me there's dinosaurs and they're real and they're running around Australia?
Imagine being the therapist for that. It's like, okay, today
You know what, you guys get up. I gotta sit down on the couch today. I got a lot to take in.
Dude, there's really only two ways that conversation could have went down. There's the positive way which it happened, right? Oh, why didn't you just tell me sooner? Versus, really, is that your excuse? It's like, just tell me the truth. Do you
It's
think
one
I'm
of those
stupid?
things that you would almost have to believe because there's no way this person thinks that's a viable lie. I saw a dinosaur and I got scared.
Everyone's got that Hail Mary.
It's true. It's true. But yes, there's an interesting story on the Burringer. No tracks found on either occasion, unfortunately. There was a follow-up, apparently, from the person who heard about the Aborigine story with the crocodile head and the kangaroo body. They recalled what park they had been to and remembered that they had heard the story because a tour guide had told them this kind of spooky story about this creature having attacked one of the park rangers and wanted to know if that was actually based on a real incident. They contacted the department of that park, and as far as we can tell, if it did happen, it's not been recorded. So make of that what you will.
There have been tracks, though. There have been casted tracks.
Mm-hmm.
How real are they? Again, up for debate.
Yeah, it is up for debate. It's up for debate, and it also, especially in Gilroy's writing, which I wish I didn't have to refer to so much, but it is really one of the only pieces of writing independently about the Burringer. There are some tracks that are really, really interesting. And then there's some that I'm pretty sure are nothing. Here, let me get a good example right here, actually. I actually have this framed on my desk, and it's a picture of Rex Gilroy, I believe in 2001, presenting what he claimed was a Burringer track. And it's one of the only ones I've seen him hold a picture of that actually appears to be fossilized or recent, a theropod track. So this is it here.
I think I saw a video of him presenting that.
Yeah, there's a video of that. Yeah.
The size of it, 2 to 3 feet, right? 2 to 3 feet
Yes.
diameter.
Right.
Would that be like the size of a T-Rex, or would that be smaller?
There are, I think I discussed this in the Burringer video. You've watched that much more recently than I have, Jasmine, so correct me if I'm wrong on that. And I recall that I think I did a shape and size comparison to what we know Tyrannosaur footprints look like. As far as I can recall, the size was in the same ballpark, but the shape was a bit off in terms of the divergency of the toes, I think was what got me, because it's supposed to be a bit more narrow than that.
I think in general, a lot of talk about the Burringer is that it is a little smaller than a full-grown like Tyrannosaurus Rex dinosaur, but still similar in everything else.
Like Allosaurus.
Allosaurus has been brought up, but let me say this, and I think that this is really important to any discussion on the Burringer. One of the biggest problems that I always had with the Burringer story was that there was no fossil precursor for it. We had large raptors for theropods in Australia, and that was basically it. We didn't have Tyrannosaur-like theropods. We didn't have that build until, I believe, 2018 or 19. And as far as I can tell, I'm forgetting the name of this species, but if you look up Australian theropod, you will eventually find an article that I think the title is something like Tyrannosaur-sized dinosaur found in Australia. And it's about a new fossil finding. As far as I can tell, fossil footprints that indicate that, yes, there were Tyrannosaur-sized theropods. They weren't tyrannosaurs, most likely, but they were essentially the same looking thing as a tyrannosaur in Australia at one point. So, and our estimated height for that is just a little bit under what Burringer reports talk about. So I think we're looking at upwards of between 15 and 20 feet at the hip, which is how you would measure a theropod, because that's actually their highest point is the hip, or one of the highest points rather, since they hold their bodies horizontally. So we do have a non-tyrannosaur and non-previously known species precursor for a theropod in Australia. That doesn't necessarily say anything about whether or not that theropod survived the KT extinction, which is what we would call the extinction that happens at the end of the Cretaceous period that wipes out the dinosaurs. I forget where I was going to loop this back around to. Someone else take this away.
Well, dinosaurs survived and they're out there.
Yep.
Clearly.
That's what Carrick is trying to say.
And there's
Oh.
always two kinds. Like you said, there's raptors, but then we have the other kind, which is Megaraptors.
Mm-hmm.
Which is actually the term that we do use. Yeah, we do have Megaraptors.
Well,
No, I'm
that's
serious.
true.
It's actually the case.
Yeah, I know.
Okay.
Yeah, I
thought
knew
you-
that, dude. No, I knew that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow, Eli. Wow.
Listen. I am very intelligent.
You know, to be fair, you have to have a high IQ to understand Cryptid Campfire.
Oh. Well, I was gonna say, you guys know we are very smart. We have a podcast.
We have a podcast.
We
Before we get back to tracks, I want to talk about something that Gilroy talked about when talking about tracks, and note a few things about it because it feeds into his theory about the Burringer, which is going to be one maybe that you've run into online, but it doesn't appear many places online. Gilroy asserts that these actually are not surviving dinosaurs. They are time-traveling dinosaurs.
Yes, let's go.
He asserts that there are what he calls areas of time windows in which prehistoric wildlife sometimes comes through, stays for a while, and then exits again, whether or not of its own volition. And he has described multiple trackways that he and other witnesses have supposedly come upon, in which the trackway begins out of nowhere and ends out of nowhere. Now, I want to make something clear about that, though. Out of all the ones he said that he has personally visited to see in person, he does not have one photograph of said trackways in this book. He's got photos of what he says are fossil trackways, a few that are recent. Some of the recent ones are interesting, and then we have some, hopefully we can see this well, like this, which is just an imprint in rock as far as I can tell, that doesn't appear to actually be shaped like a theropod track.
wait, what was that? What was that?
It's well, he claims it's a theropod track. Okay, hang on. I can't really. I will send you photos of this. It is a shape that's a ball with two other balls over here in rock, that's what rock looks like. And he's drawn in chalk around it. And I'm really not trying to personally talk down about a researcher or anything like that. He's drawn chalk around imprints and called it a fossilized dinosaur footprint. And it's just not clear enough to call it that. And so many of them are like that. And that brings me to the ultimate reason Eli knows about this. The ultimate reason for why I do not think this is the most questionable thing in Gilroy's writing. The most questionable thing. And it is partially what makes me rely on the little other sources that we have to talk about the Burringer, like the accounts that were given in the comment section of a channel that I run, or like a video that we'll discuss about tracks in a second, hopefully.
Mm-hmm.
So he also claims to have found other dinosaur fossilized footprints. One of them being of the sauropod variety, which is the long-necked dinosaurs, quadrupedal, kind of elephant almost looking feet. And it's the same thing where it's kind of just rough shapes that he seems to have drawn in chalk around for the most part. Some of them do not resemble sauropod anatomy that I'm familiar with. But here's something else. Let's just all talk about species for 1 second here. If you found the paw print of a fox in your backyard, and you were completely aware that foxes are not known to be in your area very commonly, would you therefore think, oh, this must be a new species of fox? Just a yes or no question. Would you think that right off the bat?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
possible
Yeah.
mega fox.
And I would call it Foximus watsonius.
Oh, fancy.
Jasmine, thank you for answering honestly.
You're welcome.
Well, I'm setting up what you're gonna say.
I was going to
Karen.
say, but at the same time, Eli has set up what is not a joke, which is that after finding this not sauropod track, which is this one right here, and calling it a sauropod track, Gilroy, knowing nothing about, as far as I can tell, what kind of sauropod it came from, precisely how old the footprint is, because you can't tell that by just simple observation. He knows the dimensions of the imprint, and that's basically it. He says, next to this picture, and I quote, on Friday the 30th, September, on a cliff top, Rex Gilroy stumbled upon this 40 centimeter long by 37 centimeter wide larger sauropod fossil track. It has tentatively been given the species name Montanosaurus gilroyi, meaning mountain saurian. And I don't mean to make such a joke out of that, but that is a very, very premature conclusion. And once I read that, I looked back at most of the other tracks, not all of them, but most of them, and thought, all of these are probably that, right? All of these are probably imprints in the ground that he doesn't actually know very much about. So tracks are a problem in that way. Tracks are a big problem in that way. There are some that are interesting that he lists, but most of them are not. Most of them are along the same lines as Montanosaurus gilroyi.
And the reason that that's so disappointing is because the tracks are usually one of the most strong pieces of evidence for the existence of some sort of creature.
Yes, referring to John Bindernagel, who didn't talk about dinosaurs, obviously, he talked about the North American Sasquatch when he was still alive. One of the things that he brought up in a lecture that stuck with me was, well, footprints are important because we, as wildlife biologists, which is what he was, most of the time we're relying on tracks to conduct any kind of scientific survey. So these aren't things that mean nothing. These are important. And things like the track that is either fossilized or recent that Gilroy has in the picture, that one's a bit more significant. And then you have this video, and it's a bit hard to find on YouTube because the name of it is Footprints on the Sand. And most of the time, when you look it up on YouTube, you'll find Bible passages, actually. But if you look up Burringer playlist, and I think the YouTuber is Xenosaurian, I think that's the account, they have a playlist put together of Burringer videos, like videos on the Burringer, I should say. And one of them is Footprints on the Sand. Now, the uploader of that video has been inactive for quite some time. So I don't think we'll ever get the full backstory about this video. But what it is a video taken by what appears to be some tourists who are being shown around the Australian bush by some Aborigines. They're driving in this Jeep. They come upon this weird trackway of footprints in sand. So they could, for one thing, they cannot be fossilized because this is sand. And Australia is a pretty wind-blown continent. Fun fact, the reason most of Australian geography is the way it is because it's been susceptible to winds for millions of years. That's why most of it's kind of arid. So this is not something that can just sit there for years and years and years. This is within the last day recent. And they look like theropod tracks. They have a horizontal pad and 3 toes that extend outward. It might look more kind of like an ostrich track because the toes are very straight, but they look roughly like theropod tracks. And we would categorize something like an ostrich as a surviving theropod, technically, actually. So that video interests me a lot because I'm still trying to figure out what that could be. And I'm not coming up with a whole lot of good answers. I made an attempt, and Eli, I think I have put this PDF in our folder So if you want to use the images from this, please go ahead. A diagram, because there is a single point in the video where someone steps next to one of these tracks at the same angle. And what that allows for is potentially a size estimation. So you take the length of this person's foot. Obviously, we don't know what the length is. All we know is that it's a male. So you take the national average shoe size for a male, put that into inches in length. And literally in Photoshop, all I had to do once I knew what my estimate was for this person's foot length was draw a line from his heel to his toes. And then in the track next to him, the theropod track, or what we're calling the theropod track, draw a line from the heel to the toes. Compare them, split the one that we have an estimate for into even pieces, and then compare them. And what that puts us at is those theropod tracks each roughly being around a foot in length, which is kind of small for something like a Tyrannosaurus per se. But that's the rough estimate. And we don't know as well how long the stride is on these tracks. I haven't been able to measure that. I don't think we can accurately measure that. As it is, this measurement's an estimation at very best, but it's an estimation. So I don't know what made those. As far as I can tell, the cassowary, which is one of the bipedal birds in Australia, I don't know if the foot dimensions fit that. I think the last time I checked, it fell short by a few inches. I think we're talking something like 7 inches, 7.9 inches maybe.
Now, speaking of those birds, those and emus, they are extremely dinosaur-like. I mean, birds are related to dinosaurs. And it's been speculated that maybe if some of those birds have lost their feathers, or maybe at a distance you just don't see the feathers, and that could just be some of the sightings of the Burrungers, just misidentified large birds.
Yeah, I think that idea is really interesting, actually, because it gets us into a little bit of talking about convergent evolution, which is maybe we're not looking at surviving dinosaurs, we're just looking at animals that look a hell of a lot like a dinosaur. And like you mentioned, if you were to take all the feathers off of a cassowary or all the feathers off of an emu, you would come up with something that looks like an oviraptor, basically. It's not just they look like theropods. Scientifically, they are direct descendants of theropods, and a lot of scientific circles argue we should be classifying these things as theropods. So, you know, that's interesting, especially because Australia has a somewhat, in terms of the variety you can have with that kind of bird, a wide variety of them. So I think that's interesting. Someone's before has brought up, I forget what it's called, but I'll check the name really quick because it is in a folder, that there used to be what we might call giant, we'll actually say person size, because that's what they were, kangaroos in Australia, a prehistoric species of kangaroo that grew to, I think it's 6 feet tall, which is not what people describe with the Burrunger, but you know, food for thought, I guess.
A big kangaroo, man. Ooh.
That is a big kangaroo. Yeah, it's scary. Those things. I'm glad that we don't have to deal with those commonly.
Yeah. One of my favorite comments that I read in doing some of the online research for this episode was a discussion about what possible explanations are. Somebody wrote, "It's probably just kangaroos, man. You can't tell me those MFers don't look like dinosaurs."
I saw that comment just today, actually, just today. And again, that kind of comes back to the whole, if there are descriptions in Aborigine folklore of what essentially is reptilian kangaroo, it's not a far cry to say, you know, especially in older descriptions. I will say that in older descriptions where the word dinosaur would not have been in common use, and you had kangaroos around you, and you saw a theropod dinosaur, the closest thing you have is a kangaroo. So you would say, I don't know, it was a really big kangaroo. It had weird legs, and it had lizard skin. That's the closest you could possibly get. So, yeah, you know, there's that too. So there's a lot of different theories on the Burrunger. There's everything from surviving dinosaur to what you might call like a proto or neo dinosaur sort of thing. You know,
Whoa.
looks like a dinosaur. Birds of some kind. Some people would say kangaroos, and Rex Gilroy says time traveling dinosaurs.
Yeah, there's talk of interdimensional window fallers on the internet about the Burringer.
Yes.
But I mean, we've talked a little bit about the bird theories, you know, and then we're also kind of talking about the like reptile theories. The area in Australia is inhabited by a large monitor lizard called the
Yes.
parenta, which are typically around 8 feet long, but can grow up to 10 feet long. And there's a ranger who claimed he observed an oversized herp swallow. Sorry, I'm tripping over my words because the word herp gets me. Even though I looked it up, I still like it's one syllable, but it trips me up. He saw one stand up on 2 feet to swallow a goat.
Right.
Oh,
know.
whoa.
Yeah.
That's psycho.
Yeah. I can guarantee you that if there are people in Australia who are thinking about what would happen if I saw a Burringer and they were driving down a road and happened to see anything like that happening at night, if you weren't familiar with wildlife, you would come out of that and think, oh my God, I saw a Burringer. I saw a 2-legged lizard eating an animal.
Yeah.
That's a Burringer. That's a Burringer, right? You know, it reminds me a lot when I was filming the Champ documentary, released the Bodette film. I saw a video of a pike, a freshwater pike, swimming with its head poking out of the water, which apparently they do. Not very commonly, but enough to categorize it as a known phenomenon. And I can't help but, you know, I'm not local to the area and I'm not familiar with fish. I don't fish. So if I had been on the lake during that filming and seen that happen, I would have passed out and thought, oh my God, a plesiosaur just swam by my boat. So there is this phenomenon where the interpretation of what you see is almost everything. So
check it. I have a report here from 1978. And I just want to get your thoughts on this.
Okay.
So this report tells of a man named Brian Clark who went into the woods and got lost sometime during 1978. After the alarm was raised, he was tracked by policemen and 2 Aboriginal bushmen. The trackers woke up one night to a loud, thunderous sound and the ground shaking. After finding the wayward traveler, policemen later told the man that if he ever went back into the woods and got lost, that they would not come looking for him. Some think that the sound was the stomping of the Burringer. However, a light-footed theropod dinosaur would not crash around the undergrowth in this manner, despite what certain Spielberg movies would have the public believe.
Oh, cutting some promos there.
Well, that is, it comes back to us talking about the fact that there is, especially with things like Jurassic Park, this popular image of the large theropod as a thing that can afford to be dumb and boisterous because what are you going to do? Stop it? Which is not
what am
like
I going to do?
Yeah. What you say?
What am I going to do? It could just step on me.
Yeah, exactly. It's like when you first learned that they run 25 miles an hour. It's like, oh, well, I guess that's that then, you know. But no, there is this image that creates that it isn't like I don't think that that's zoologically implausible. It just isn't correct for theropods because theropods we know had very developed craniums, and the areas in which they were developed, these things, especially the larger ones, are predators, and maybe they're also scavengers. And they plan things out. They're not stupid. They understand that they can be heard, or I should say they could understand that they would be heard. And if there was a threat, they were assessing threats. We even have some evidence that suggests that tyrannosaurs, I think especially, coordinated hunting efforts. We always think of the velociraptor in Jurassic Park as the coordinated one. T-Rexes were potentially doing the same thing because we have some kill sites where there's the prey body and the T-Rex body, and there's more than one T-Rex. And their placement suggests these things were following the prey, and they were attempting to corner it. So this was a strategic effort to get prey in a hunting attempt. So these are not things that don't care if you hear them or not.
Mm-hmm.
That being said, it doesn't mean that there's no room for behavior variety. That's T-Rex. In terms of the Australian fossil record, we're not even talking about a tyrannosaur. A tyrannosaur-like animal, but not a tyrannosaur. It doesn't mean that it wasn't intelligent. It doesn't mean that it was that coordinated either. There's a lot of reports in Rex Gilroy's book about the same kind of thing with hearing rumblings and hearing steppings and things like that. One thing that I did find that was interesting, and this is one of those things that I look at and I think it's one of the only pieces that Rex gives us in the book of evidence that actually really intrigues me. And it is massive areas of flattened out grass, like tall grass that has been flattened out. It looks like 5 bears came in, laid down for the night, got up and left. But there's no bears in Australia.
That we know of.
That we know of. Maybe there are camels doing this, because that would be the largest animal I can think of. I don't know if cassowaries do bedding situations with each other. But a large animal of some kind had come through the area and flattened out the grass. And of course, Rex says, oh, well, this is the path that a Burringer has taken through the grass, because it's stepped over the grass, and because they're so big, they flatten it when they walk through. I don't know what causes that. That's kind of in line, with the whole doesn't care about being seen thing that we seem to see a lot in these reports. I've actually bookmarked one of the reports that I was talking about earlier, with where the full names of people are given. And it reminds me a bit about the topic that we're talking about right now, because it's this thing that comes right into the open, doesn't assess a threat, and then just leaves, which again is not what we would consider typical of larger theropods, but it's interesting. And there is an accompanying illustration, which I think is actually from another book, if I'm not mistaken, that is not about the Burringer. But I suppose Rex somehow got permission to use it. This is the illustration right here. It's a T-Rex running alongside a modern highway.
Whoa.
And the caption says, one afternoon in October of 1961, truck driver Gary Shears and his mate Bernie Thomas were driving on the Stewart Highway from Bonka Bonka when at a point about 50 kilometers north of Tennant Creek, Gary saw through his rear vision mirror a, quote, big reptilian animal, as he described it, mottled colored, suddenly emerged from the roadside scrub to pursue the vehicle. As a frightened Gary increased speed, his mate Bernie, a part Aboriginal, upon seeing the beast through the back window, yelled, "That's a bloody Burringer," to Gary. Having put some distance between them and the monster, they were glad to see it leave the highway to vanish into the scrub. Now, there's 2 reasons I think this is interesting. One, because it gives full names of people. So I suppose if you really tried, you might be able to actually get into contact with these people if they actually exist, if you really tried. But it leads me into another point about Rex Gilroy, which is he has a particular writing style. He's rather verbose, but he also uses kind of, I don't know what the word for language is, but instead of saying animal or specimen or any other array of words for a living thing, he'll say creature or beast or monster. So there's this almost kind of old-fashioned way that he names things in a way, I think, that makes them intentionally or otherwise sound more grandiose. It's kind of like a movie, right? The beast, not the animal, the beast, the monster. And there's one problem that I have with that, not with the writing itself, but whenever he gives a direct quote from a witness, either something the witness has allegedly written down or emailed to him or said to him, they kind of talk the same as him. They word things in a way that does not seem like it is the way that one typically speaks in a conversation. Instead of saying, yeah, we heard like a really loud sound, the witness will always, in Rex's quotes from witnesses, say something like, we were disturbed by a sound of great volume. And that isn't how people talk.
Yeah.
So
we found ourselves confronted by a giant beast.
Yes, literally things like that. I was suddenly confronted with a large reptilian monstrosity, I think is one of
Whoa. Whoa.
that isn't
Ooh,
the way that people tend to talk. That's Rex Gilroy's writing pattern. But it's appearing in quotes that are supposedly not from Rex Gilroy. And I think that that's significant, and I'm not trying to say definitively that therefore he's making these up, but there's a lot of room for that to be investigated. It's not like that's out of the question. It's far from out of the question as far as I'm concerned. And, you know, analysis of literary patterns, that's something that gets people put in jail. When you analyze, you know, fake suicide letters and things like that, that's no bogus science right there.
Whoa,
So
I had no idea. That's crazy.
yeah, especially when it comes, I think usually it comes down to more things like financial fraud attempts. You analyze handwriting, or you analyze the way in which I watched one program. It was something like, you know, the first 48 or something like that. But there were at least 2 programs I've seen where there is a fake suicide letter to cover up a murder. And investigators analyze the letter compared to the victim's other writing. And they're like, this person didn't write this. This isn't how this person talks whatsoever. So yeah, that's a real kind of analysis. And it definitely makes me suspicious of the book.
Wow. Hook, line, and sinker. Dude, this is probably the most devastating thing since
the Bronze Age.
Since the Bronze Age. But I would like to say, I do think that, well, hope's the wrong word, because I think the goal is to figure things out more so than to have a living T-Rex, although that would be kind of cool. But there is still room for the Burringer. I think. I don't know how much there is, but the fact that we have some accounts, 3 of them potentially, 2 of them certainly, as far as the validity of an account can actually go, that are outside of Rex Gilroy's work, that we have the footprints on the sand video, and that we do have, you know, the fossil record leaves room for something like a prehistoric descendant of a potential Burringer to still exist, and the fact that we do have some named individuals in the book, says to me something weird is going on. Now, I don't know what that is. It could just be weird in the sense that, wow, look at how many people are misinterpreting regular things as living dinosaurs. Or it could be something else. I don't know. But it's certainly an interesting case. And I think there's still room for investigation. I don't think Gilroy's strange way of putting this together has closed the doors necessarily.
I was gonna say, we talked earlier about the theory that it's a time traveling dinosaur. What if it's the ghost of a dinosaur, just like Nessie?
Oh yeah.
Who knows?
We got ghosts of dinosaurs.
The ghosts of dinosaurs.
Or you know what I was thinking is, if it is imagine if you will, it's 65 million years ago, or the Cretaceous period, whenever that was. There's a Tyrannosaurus walking around. It's doing its thing. It's walking through the mire, having fun. It's thinking about eating the Stegosaurus. And then next thing you know, it walks through a time tunnel, pops up in like 1979 Australia. It's very confused, very disoriented, making a lot of noise, walking around, eating half cows because it's feeling the symptoms of time travel before it just kind of wanders back into, you know, the Cretaceous period. And it's just like, what the hell was that?
That is exactly what Rex Gilroy's theory is, and it's so funny picturing it like that, how confusing that would be.
Yeah. And maybe it walks over its own bones too.
How trippy would that be?
Whoa.
Walking over, right? It's like, this used to be my nest, now it's just like a skull here that's roughly my size. That's weird.
Dude, you could create a whole comic book on this.
You could.
Like,
really could.
An existential crisis of a tyrannosaur
living in the modern age.
And it's, you know, and the cover could be it staring at its own skull. You know,
that's actually
at the museum.
At the
museum. that's gonna be my Barney reboot. That's how Barney is in the modern day. He's
Dude,
a time
Zach
traveler.
the dinosaur.
He's trying to deal with the fact that he's like, oh man, well, 65 million years ago, all dinosaurs ceased on Earth, and I'm the last one.
It means he
I'm a
can't go
man out of
back.
time.
That's the horrible part, right? Is that means if he becomes aware that he gets fossilized, he has an ultimatum now. Because if he doesn't go back to the time window, he changes his fate. But what will his fate be now?
To be friends with everyone in the world. That's why Barney's on such a kick.
Well, this is the real kicker, right? He doesn't go back, and then he dies in present day, but a time traveler from the future takes his then fossilized bones to the modern day and puts it in the museum. So he thinks he died in the extinction,
Whoa!
but he didn't.
What a great idea. This would be an interesting project.
I'm telling you, dude, it writes itself.
In the last 5 minutes, we end with Barney looking at the skeleton on display, and he's like, man, I can't believe this is how I go. And he walks away and he turns around and he sees a bullet hole in the back of the skull.
Oh my goodness.
And
Dude.
it turns into he's got to solve his own pre-murder mystery.
That's funny. Oh my god. I do want to kind of out of place, I suppose, posit one last argument that I have about the Burringer. I think it's the last one that I have.
Is that it's
And
real?
Argument
Yeah.
that it's
Bye.
real. Who says otherwise is just a Gilroy hater. No, that I want to argue against the time travel theory, and I want to argue against it because Rex Gilroy actually invites us as readers to do so in his book. So I'm going to follow that and try. The idea of the time window does not. Let's leave aside that we have no idea what kind of mechanics that would even operate off of in terms of the way our universe works, right? Let's assume that we do know that happens, or at least we know that it could happen.
For the sake of
Why-
this argument, time travel is real.
For the sake of the
Okay.
argument, yes. So why is it only in areas with no people? Why hasn't the T-Rex popped up in the middle of Main Street?
I mean, I guess it depends too, like you said, what time travel we're working with. Is this the Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's court?
Where we'll say it's like apparently at random locations, or what appear to be random locations, there are areas that you can't see, but when you walk into it, you've entered a time wormhole, essentially. And when you come out the other side, which is just a second, you're suddenly apparently 65 million years in the future. And my question is, why is it that because of, 65 million years ago, there was not plans for a city right there. There were no plans for Sydney, Australia.
Well, I actually kind of have a solution to
A solution.
it's not a solution, but it's something John Keel, author of the Mothman Prophecies, was actually looking into, which is, I think he talks about it extensively in his book, The Eighth Tower, which he talks about the idea of ley lines existing in the world. Basically, they're almost like supernatural lines that divide
They're like
the planet.
currents, right? They say.
Yes.
Currents, but the strangest thing is, somehow, some way, animals and humans seem to be like aware of these without being consciously aware of these.
So things that we build are unintentionally avoiding that, is what you're saying.
Avoiding them or going along with them, even going so far as roads being directly built on top of a ley line and being named like Ley Lane and stuff like that. Like it's
That is-
super weird. So like it's totally possible that if there are time windows or whatever, that they're along certain ley lines or intersections or something like that, that inherently people don't want to build anything next to or anything around. So they always end up in the middle of nowhere. So it's to us,
Maybe there is a link between. I wonder if Gilroy has read any of Keel. I think he would enjoy Keel very much from what I've read.
Keel's up there with having very questionable evidence.
I felt Keel was, and I haven't read much of Keel, but
It's fun.
Gotten is that whereas there's suspicion that Gilroy has intentionally conflated the Burringer, it seems that Keel is more so suspected of just being massively mistaken. Would you say that that's correct, or am I wrong on that?
I don't think he's mistaken. I think he does. I think no. I mean, maybe he is suspected of that. I don't suspect him of that. I suspect him of the same thing I suspect Ivan Sanderson of, which is punching up the story a little bit to make it more exciting.
Okay.
Yeah, even if it didn't happen, you know, I mean, straight up, Ivan Sanderson, we talked about him a couple episodes ago, straight up calls the Kongamoto like Dracula, right?
Mhm,
Right.
mhm.
Yeah,
I recall that. Yeah.
yeah, it's like, okay, bro, that's
Yeah.
And also massively, as far as I can tell, misinterpreted the Skraeling, which are that's a bit of a divergent path, but I'll make it very quick. When the Vikings and the Scandinavians first arrived in North America, they called the natives Skraeling. And they had these myths about the ones who were leaders being taller and more broad and more impressive, and the ones that were lower status being literally lower in stature. And the thing is, there's actually a common thread throughout a lot of social interpretation mythology throughout many cultures, and it hasn't usually meant literally these people are tiny. It's a strange, spun out of control metaphor for low in
status.
final stature.
Like a hierarchy.
Like a hierarchy, physical representation of hierarchy. Yes, the taller you are, the stronger you are. That's the badass who's in charge of the tribe, sort of thing. And the Vikings called them Skraeling. And Ivan Sanderson, granted, there's some stories that he picked up on that suggest something else going on too. So I won't say he's entirely wrong about that. But his interpretation of that was too literal, it seems. And he interpreted it actually meant that there were races of small people living on the coastline of what is now Canada. So, yeah, there's a problem with that kind of misinterpretation. I also want to show, I just found the carvings that we were talking about in the beginning, the alleged Burringer carvings.
Oh,
and again,
sick.
Eli, I'll also send you some really prime examples of Aborigine art to show, to kind of compare. And you'll find too that it looks like it's made of the same material that Rex uses to outline prints, which I think is also questionable. This is the most well-known one that I'm aware of.
Yep, that's the one I've seen.
Yeah, you've seen that one. There's another one, which is, how shall I put this lightly? We'll say less impressive. And I don't mean to say it like that, but it seems more...
went a little more Picasso with it this time.
A bit more Picasso. Yeah. And then you have things like this one as well. And my main problem with that is, for one thing, it follows a theme of the book, which is incorrect model of theropod. Most of the depictions he has of theropods in this book have them standing upright like people. And that is a very old, like we're talking 1920s and 30s concept.
Right.
We're now aware that because of hip joint structure and leg structure and spinal structure and basically everything we know about theropod structure, horizontal to the ground for the most part, not like this. And Rex Gilroy's depictions tend to be like this. And the cave paintings he shows tend to be like this.
Woof.
And if you look at Aboriginal art, even of kangaroos, they knew anatomy. When they drew a kangaroo, you were like, that is so obviously a kangaroo. There's nothing else that could be. And for them to see a theropod, even like this on the cover, which is not entirely accurate still, but more accurate, and then to draw it with the stature of a person is like, well, why? So that's the end of my talk about the book. I'll put that away. Right, I don't keep extending the podcast here too much.
No worries. No, I think we covered the I mean, I don't know what else to talk about. I think.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there's a lot more to the Barringer than I thought there was. And you know, if you're disappointed out there that it looks like it might not be a real T-Rex walking around in the Australian outback, don't worry. There's plenty of confirmed animals out there that can kill you 6 ways till Sunday.
That is very true.
Australia is a deadly place, even without Tyrannosauruses.
Well, I think it only proves that the only place dinosaurs could still be alive is Africa.
Is that where you're going next, is the question?
No, we already went there.
I already went there. Australia's our last stop. We only have one more episode after this, actually.
Wow. Well, you know
One
what?
more show.
Let me leave you then as the world tour that you're doing here comes to a close in Australia. give you a Burringer-related tourist spot that does apparently exist in Australia. It's a crossing
ready.
sign along the Stuart Highway that was originally a kangaroo crossing sign. After all of this, I have some suspicion that a certain author may have done this himself,
God.
but it is known that either locals or the author of this book instead wanted to make this into a T-Rex crossing sign.
Heck yeah.
So if you're in Australia, whether or not you believe in the Burringer or not, whether you put validity into the story, if you're into cryptids, visit the Stuart Highway and you might get a look at the world's only Burringer crossing sign.
Amazing.
Whoa. Well, Carrick, I want to thank you for breaking it down.
Of course. It was really fun
Yeah.
being on the podcast.
The Montanosaurus Gilroy eye is real.
Montanosaurus Gilroy eye. It's
Yes.
a cautionary tale, that one.
I was thinking more. What's the first part?
Montanosaurus.
Montanosaurus,
Gilroy.
Saint Laurentina.
Saint Laurentina.
All right. Well, Carrick, break it down for us. Where can we find
Yeah.
you?
Cut us a
Well,
promo, Carrick.
Where
Yeah,
can we watch your Burringer video?
Over on the Crash Course Cryptozoology YouTube channel, which I've recently expanded into a second channel for short documentaries and for longer ones, which I'll start uploading soon. I just finished coming out with my third feature-length documentary. And so now the channel's kind of back into full swing with doing shorter cryptozoology videos, which is, I think, more so my passion. You can find me on there very easily. My email is crash.course.cryptozoology@gmail.com. I have a Facebook group for Crash Course Cryptozoology as well. And I'll plug this a bit here. I've begun writing a book on the Burringer, and I hope that it will be interesting. And there'll be some more news about that on Facebook and things like that when that's coming more out of fruition. So
Hell yeah.
And
Very
it's called
exciting.
A Tyrannical Mishap, right?
it is not called a tyrannical mishap.
Oh.
What a title that would have been, a tyrannical mishap. I did consider Dinosaurs Down Under. I did consider that,
Well,
but decided against it.
you can have that title if you want.
Tyrannical mishap. It'll be Eli's biography, a tyrannical mishap.
Why is that my biography? The story of my life is a tyrannical mishap. Yikes. Yikes.
It's okay,
Well,
Eli.
I want to thank everyone for listening. If you guys have watched this on the YouTubes, be sure you hit that like button, click subscribe. It is on the Paranormal Network YouTube channel. Peep it, peep it.
Oh yeah.
Check out our website. That's cryptidcampfire.com. Give us a follow at Cryptid Campfire, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. We're active in all three. Jasmine will get back to you pretty quickly, is what I've discovered. If you DM us,
Don't hold me to that standard though, because now people will just be upset if I don't get back to them right away.
yeah, if she does not respond within 30 seconds, you can be rest assured that you will not get a response back. Just kidding.
No.
I'm joking. Jasmine does a very good job. And if you enjoyed this episode, if you visited our website, got yourself a snazzy t-shirt, followed us, DM'd us, and you still need more, check us out on Patreon. $5 a month gets you access to exclusive episodes. That's 2 new episodes every month, as well as an exclusive wallpaper designed by our very own Alex Daikaiju. One of my favorite exclusive episodes actually has Carrick in it. That's the Ropin of Papua New Guinea, which is just north of Australia.
Yes.
It's another dinosaur. Carrick, we only get you to talk about dinosaurs, except for the 2 times I had you on to talk about Sasquatch. So
That's true. Am I talking about hairy apes, or I'm talking about dinosaurs, which, to be fair, is about half of cryptozoology. So there you have it.
indeed. All right. So, and if Alex, all right,
Hello.
Alex, let's begin our sign offs.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
yeah. Hello, everyone. I'm Alex Daikaiju. You can find me on Instagram at Alex DAIKAIJU. Post a lot of monster, cryptid-related artwork. We were talking about Carrick. He only covers dinosaurs and hairy humanoids. And Jack Kirby did that when he made Devil Dinosaur back in the 70s. So it's a good tradition. Maybe I'll do some fan art going into this month talking about that cool stuff. Usually we cite our sources, but the only source I had today was the man himself, Carrick Saint Lunatic in the house. So he was a lot of great wealth of knowledge today, and talking about wealth of knowledge, wealth of awesomeness. It's Jasmine May with coming from the stars to tell us this crazy message.
Thank you. If you want to follow me on Instagram or Twitter, you can do so. My name is the same on both. It's Jasmine Maywith, JASMINEMAEWITH. As Eli mentioned, we all sort of have access to our Cryptid Campfire social media channels and profiles. So you might get a DM from one of us if you send us a message. You never know who it'll be. We don't always sign who it's from, so have fun figuring that out. But my sources for today, I just used a couple. I read Genesis Park, the Cryptozoology subreddit, New Zealand Bird Online, The Active Times, and I referenced Crash Course Cryptozoology.
Oh yeah, they're the best around.
Cited Crash Course Cryptozoology. That may be the first time.
Let's keep that train rolling. Let's start quoting it in every episode. And I'm moving the train on to the man who keeps the movement going. It's the Eli Watson, the Mushka Mishka Wallet himself.
Whoa. Well, you guys can give me a follow at the Eli Watson, and my sources for today came from the Cryptids Wiki, which is where I shared that more than questionable resource that took a dig at Spielberg's films.
Whoa.
And Carrick himself. So, thanks again. And I think that's it, fellas.
I think it is. Thank you so much for listening to this special guest star episode. We're in Australia. We're reaching the end of our world tour. Like I mentioned earlier, we do only have one episode left. So make sure you join us for the finale. And then, we'll see where we go from there, guys.
Yeah, yes. Be there or be square, baby.
Yes, indeed. And we'll see you next time.
Badam Zinga.
This podcast is a part of Straight Up Strange Productions. Discover more shows like this one at straightupstrange.com.